Ancient Greece, a land of marble temples, radiant philosophers, and gods carved into stone. But beneath the shine of their sculptures and the echo of their orators lies a far filthier truth. The elites of Athens, Corinth, and Sparta may have shaped democracy and drama, but when it came to personal hygiene, let's just say the gods might have wept. Because in ancient Greece, cleanliness wasn't about health, it was about status. And for the ruling class, bathing too often, washing too thoroughly, or even smelling too fresh could make you look poor, foreign, or worse, like you worked for a living. So today, we're peeling back the perfumed veil to show you the 5 most disgusting hygiene habits of ancient Greek elites. And by the time we get to number 1, you may never look at your favorite philosopher the same way again. Imagine midsummer in Athens, the sun relentless, the stones underfoot radiating heat like burning coals, and the air so thick it sticks to the skin. In the shaded upper terrace of a marble villa, a nobleman reclines on a bronze couch, dressed in an embroidered chiton, its once crisp linen now clinging damply to his back and arms. The fabric is soaked through, but he doesn't flinch, doesn't towel himself off, doesn't even consider bathing. Instead, he reaches for a tiny alabaster flask. It's filled with stakt, a thick, fragrant oil made from myrrh resin harvested in Arabia. With practiced ease, he anoints his armpits, his neck, his chest, and even his scalp. The smell is rich, earthy, and almost spicy. It clings to him more insistently than the sweat ever could. This was not a rare scene. In ancient Greece, especially among the elite, fragrance had long since replaced soap. Bathing, though known and occasionally practiced, wasn't central to daily hygiene for the aristocracy. While the lower classes might wash in rivers or at public baths, the wealthy often avoided water altogether, especially cold water, which they believed could weaken the body, disturb the humours, and open the pores to disease. Instead, they perfumed. Lavish blends of oil were used not just to disguise body odour, but to signify status. A scent wasn't merely about smell, it was about power. The more rare and exotic the ingredients, iris from Illyria, cinnamon from India, saffron from Thrace, rose from Paestum, the more respected you were. You didn't need to be clean, you only needed to smell expensive. Women followed similar rituals. They often layered oils infused with floral notes behind the ears, under the breasts, and on the soles of their feet. Some wore scented garlands on their heads, or tied sachets of herbs into their girdles. A visiting noblewoman might enter a home trailing clouds of rose and clove, but beneath it all was a body that hadn't seen water in days or weeks. And while it might seem counterintuitive today, many Greek physicians of the time actually encouraged this behavior. Hippocrates himself wrote that natural oils and bodily secretions formed a protective barrier against illness. Washing too much, especially with soap or harsh abrasives, was thought to strip away that barrier and invite disease. Dirt was, in a way, medicinal. This philosophy extended to children, soldiers, and even athletes. Wrestlers would oil themselves before combat, not only to make themselves harder to grip, but because it was believed to balance their bodily humours. Afterward, instead of bathing, they would scrape the mixture of oil, dust, and sweat from their skin with a strigil, a curved metal blade. The residue, called gloios, was even collected and sold as a healing remedy by apothecaries. That's right, elite Greek grime was bottled and reused. At elite symposiums, guests reclined shoulder to shoulder in packed rooms heavy with incense, wine, and human odour. The scent of sandalwood oil mingled with fermented sweat and the sour tang of overripe garlands, yet no one blinked. No one complained. Because to be perfumed, even over filth, was to be refined. And while the poor may have scrubbed their bodies with sand or clay, the rich simply covered themselves in myth, scented, shimmering, and untouchable. Theirs was a cleanliness of illusion, not reality. And in Athens, illusion was often the greatest truth of all. To the modern eye, ancient Greek bathhouses conjure images of polished marble, heated pools, and flowing fountains, serene sanctuaries of cleanliness and relaxation. But step into a Balanean during the golden age of Athens, and you discover a far different reality, not a temple of hygiene, but a stage for status. Bathhouses were not about getting clean, they were about being seen. In these steamy, echoing halls, lined with terracotta tiles and sweaty egos, powerful men came to perform. They arrived in groups, laughing loudly, their tunics already loosened, their skins slick with perfumed oil. They reclined on stone benches while servants fanned them or massaged their calves. They argued philosophy in one breath and ogled younger bodies in the next. Bathing, when it happened at all, was merely a flourish, a final touch to the performance of leisure. Soap, as we understand it, didn't exist in Athens. Instead, the ritual was raw. After hours spent in the gymnasium, elite men, dusty with sand and sweat from wrestling or discus, would step aside, not for a bath, but for a scraping. Enter the strigil, a curved bronze blade designed to drag oil, dust, dead skin, and grime from the body. With slow, practiced strokes, aristocrats would scrape themselves clean, or more often, have slaves do it for them. The collected sludge, called gloios, pooled in small basins. And here's where it gets truly bizarre. This foul mixture wasn't discarded. It was sold. Yes, bottled gloios, from the bodies of celebrated warriors or admired orators, was marketed as a cure-all. Athletes rubbed it on bruises. Mystics claimed it boosted virility. To own a vial of another man's skin oil dirt cocktail was to possess a piece of his essence. It was medicine. It was magic. It was disgusting. But while the sludge was communal, the tools were not. Elites brought their own strigils and oil flasks, not out of habit, but out of fear. Not fear of sweat or grime, but of contamination from the wrong people, the lower classes, foreigners, those deemed impure. The bathhouse may have been open to all citizens, but social boundaries steamed thicker than the air itself. In this humid theatre of flesh and hierarchy, proximity meant everything. A nobleman might bathe near another aristocrat to signal alliance, or avoid a rival to show disdain. Where you sat, who you spoke to, whose oil you borrowed. These were the real rituals. Cleanliness was a myth. Cleanliness was class. And as for the actual bath, most elite men would soak for mere minutes, if at all. Just enough to appear refreshed, never long enough to appear in need. Because true power meant you were untouched by dirt, untouched by labor, untouched even by the water meant to cleanse you. Meanwhile, their attendants and houseborn servants did the real work. Heating water, scrubbing tiles, managing towels, draining the tubs, often in silence, often invisible. Their sweat fueled the illusion that their masters never perspired at all. So next time you picture an Athenian nobleman, fresh from the bathhouse, imagine this instead. A man coated in oil, scraped with a blade, doused in scent, and still carrying the invisible residue of dust and ego. The sweat may have been wiped, but the performance never ended. Because in ancient Greece, bathing wasn't about removing filth. It was about never letting anyone know you were dirty to begin with. In the elite quarters of ancient Athens, smell wasn't just a personal preference, it was status. The more unnatural your scent, the more powerful you were perceived to be. Why? Because truly clean skin, fresh from water and soap, was rare, suspect even. Instead, elites sought to overwrite the human smell altogether. They bathed, if they bathed, in oils, not soap. Olive oil was mixed with cinnamon, saffron, myrrh, or crushed petals. After cleansing with a strigil, perfumed oil would be rubbed into the skin until the body gleamed. It created a sweet, spicy sheen, but not cleanliness. Real soap? That was associated with poor Scythians or slaves who scrubbed with rough clay or animal fats. The aristocrat didn't need soap. His scent came from Arabia, his oil from Lesbos, his incenses from far-off Egypt. His skin was made sacred by scarcity. The most powerful men and women of Athens wore scent-like armor. A noblewoman's hair might be stiffened with honeyed resin and powdered with imported cinnamon bark. A man might scent his beard with cardamom oil and his armpits with crushed lavender, even if he hadn't washed them in days. And the houses reeked of it. Not rot, not sweat, but overwhelming clouds of burning myrrh, rosewater simmering in copper pots, pomanders filled with clove and frankincense swung from belts like charms. Even the walls were washed in perfume. But beneath that was the truth. The perfumed elite of Athens were not clean. They were covered. They didn't fear body odor because they couldn't smell it. They feared being seen as human. If you imagine the elites of Athens smiling with rows of flawless ivory teeth, think again. Behind the marble statues and polished rhetoric lay a truth far less pristine. The mouth of a wealthy Athenian was often a battlefield, one not of words, but of decay. A slow war raged between vanity and biology, masked behind gold-trimmed veneers of civility and crushed pearl smiles. Oral hygiene, if it could be called that, was less a science than a superstition. A ritual performed in hopes of aesthetic charm, not dental health. The concept of bacteria was unknown. Toothaches were the wrath of the gods or the miasma of bad air. Remedies were borrowed from myth, trade, and whatever seemed to work on slaves. For the common folk, a smile was simply utilitarian, a grim flash of yellowed enamel between bites of barley bread and salted fish. Breath carried the scent of onions, stale wine, and survival. Teeth were tools, not ornaments. But for the aristocracy, a smile was theatre. It performed status, wealth, cultivation, and like the finest plays, it required illusion. To whiten their teeth, some elites chewed gritty pastes made of crushed oyster shells, vinegar, and occasionally burnt bone. These powders acted like sandpaper, abrasive enough to brighten, destructive enough to erode the protective enamel entirely. A bright smile often came at the price of bleeding gums and heightened sensitivity, but the short-term brilliance was worth the long-term damage. To mask foul breath, they chewed cardamom, aniseed, or fennel, imported at great cost along spice routes that traced their way from Persia and India. Rinses of diluted wine mixed with honey, fig juice, or rosewater were popular among the upper classes. But these were not cures. They were perfume for a rotting wound. And then came sugar. As trade networks expanded under the Delian League and the influence of the Mediterranean grew, sweet things began trickling into Athenian homes. Candied dates, syrup-soaked pastries, and preserved fruits sealed in clay amphorae from Egypt, Phoenicia, and the Levant. What was once a luxury reserved for gods became a marker of mortal privilege. That sugar didn't just rot the teeth, it devoured them. Ironically, it was the mouths of the rich, not the poor, that bore the worst signs of decay. Archaeological studies of high-status burials showed jaws riddled with abscesses, molars worn to the root, and incisors blackened with decay. The poor, with their coarse diets and minimal access to sweets, fared better. Still, the smile endured as a symbol of elegance, If teeth turned black or cracked, thin sheets of gold leaf could be wrapped around them, both to disguise and display. A dazzling grin gilded in precious metal was not a flaw. It was a statement. Some nobles even darkened their teeth intentionally with ash or crushed herbs, believing the effect to be wise, aged, and worldly. But when the pain finally outpaced vanity, there were options, brutal ones. Without anesthetics, dentistry in ancient Athens was a test of endurance. Wine dulled the edge. A slave might hold the patient down while the iatros, house physician or healer, heated a bronze hook until it glowed, then pressed it into an infected gum. The screams were said to echo through the courtyard. Infection was common. Septic death was a coin flip. But to go toothless, that was unthinkable. A missing tooth could imply poverty, disease, weakness, anything but refinement. So the wealthy improvised. Linen pads soaked in vinegar and cinnamon oil were tucked into cavities, masking odor and cushioning the pain. These small mouth bandages allowed speech to continue, breath to pass as pleasant, and lies to remain unchallenged. Because in the end, what mattered was not the truth beneath the teeth. It was the illusion they upheld. A smile, like a well-crafted myth, did not need to be honest. It only needed to be believed. When we think of ancient Greek elites, we picture shining marble halls, flowing togas, and airy villas perched above sparkling seas. But beneath the perfection, just beneath the tiles, lay a truth far less romantic. There were no flush toilets, no running water, no drainage systems capable of handling the daily waste of an elite household, especially one hosting symposia, servants, and slaves in constant rotation. Human waste was collected in ceramic chamber pots. These were emptied sometimes into shallow pits outside the home or tossed into alleyways under the cover of night. And when it rained, the streets of Athens turned into sewers. If you were rich, you didn't carry your own waste. That task fell to the lowest member of the household, a domestic laborer often referred to simply as the runner. Their job was to gather the night's excrement and haul it, in sloshing pails, to the outskirts of the city or into one of the illegal waste canals dug beneath shops and shrines. And for the aristocrats living above this rot, they used perfume to cope. Cedarwood incense, myrrh smoke, and bowls of crushed mint were placed in the corners of rooms to mask the sour odor that never truly left the walls. Guests at elite dinner parties would recline just feet away from where chamber pots were stored behind curtains. Their noses, numbed by wine and incense, politely ignored the truth. Sometimes, elite homes had small stone enclosures built just outside their walls, an attempt at a private latrine. But without plumbing, they were little more than fancy outhouses, and they weren't emptied often. The stench of unwashed linen, sweat, wine vomit, chamber pots, and perfumed oils mixed into a pungent cocktail known to every elite guest. And still, appearances had to be maintained. Slaves were instructed to lay fresh rosemary along the floor before parties. Guests would drag their cloaks through it, hoping it would overpower the stink. When even that failed, there was always more wine. Because in elite Athens, the answer to filth was never sanitation. It was an illusion. The philosophers of Athens debated truth, beauty, and the ideal forms. But in the shadows of their city, under silk robes and perfumed wreaths, the truth smelled different. It was sweat, blood, rot, ritual. The Greek elite lived not above the grime, but just slightly to the side of it, pretending they didn't smell what was always there. And that's the real story of ancient hygiene. Not about cleanliness, but control. A daily performance of power over nature, over odor, and over truth itself. If you found this story fascinating, hit that like button. Subscribe for more raw, researched stories from the ancient world. And let us know in the comments, what shocked you the most? Because remembering isn't just about glory, it's about all of it, even the stink.